It was past midnight when Daniel first heard the knock. At first, he thought it might have been part of the storm outside, the wind rattling loose shutters, or a branch scratching against the siding. His rented cabin sat deep in the woods of northern Maine, far from the nearest neighbor, chosen specifically for the isolation it offered. He had come for silence, a retreat from his crowded city life and constant notifications, craving nothing more than a week of peace. But silence is never truly empty. In the woods, it hums, it breathes. And that night, silence was pierced by something deliberate. 3 slow, heavy knocks against the front door. Daniel froze, staring at the flickering fire in the stone hearth, ears straining. The storm outside roared on, rain slapping against the glass panes, thunder rumbling in the distance. No car had passed on the gravel road all day, and no one knew he was here, not even his closest friends. He had told no one, wanting his solitude absolute. He tried to reason with himself. Maybe it's just the wind, maybe the wood expanding in the damp air. But deep down, he knew better. That sound hadn't been random. It had rhythm, intent, and weight. Whoever, or whatever, had knocked, wanted to be let inside, that he didn't move immediately. Instead, he stared at the door, at the way shadows trembled along the wood grain, as though something on the other side was shifting, waiting. The cabin's only light came from the fire, its glow soft and uneven, stretching across the small living space and pooling in the corners. His phone lay charging on the counter, though service was non-existent this far out. He thought about grabbing it anyway, just for the illusion of safety. The knocks didn't repeat, but that absence was worse. Daniel found himself listening so hard that the silence itself seemed to press against his skull. Finally, he rose and crept toward the door, his footsteps muted against the old wooden floorboards. The cabin creaked with each step, betraying his movements. The peephole was cloudy with age, nearly useless, so he bent his head to glance through the side window. The storm had blurred the glass with rivulets of water, distorting whatever shapes might be out there. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw the outline of a figure, tall and unmoving, just beyond the porch's wooden rail. But then lightning split the sky, and in that burst of light, the porch was empty. No footprints, no motion, just the endless churn of wind and rain that he stayed at the window long after the lightning faded, his breath fogging the glass. Doubt seeped into him. Was it exhaustion, his mind inventing sounds from the storm? He had been awake since dawn, driving through twisting back roads, chasing that quiet retreat. Perhaps fatigue was playing tricks. With a long exhale, he stepped back, convincing himself to let it go. He turned away, intending to return to the fire, but as he did, something caught his ear, a sound not from outside, but from within. A faint shuffle, as though someone was dragging their foot across the floorboards upstairs, in the part of the cabin he had not yet explored. Daniel stood frozen in the dark, every nerve in his body alive with fear. The sound of the tap on the glass echoed inside his chest more than his ears, the kind of sound that seemed to carry intent. He forced himself to crouch and relight the lantern, hands trembling so badly the flame nearly died again. When the weak glow returned, it barely pushed back the shadows in the corners of the cabin. His breath came shallow, rapid. He tried to rationalize, a branch against the window, wind he couldn't feel, but his grandfather's words clung to his mind like burrs. Do not answer back. The tap returned, louder this time, followed by a scrape that trailed along the outside wall. Daniel's heart hammered as he staggered backward, tripping over a box of old tools. Something about the sound was deliberate, like fingernails dragging along wood. He forced himself to look toward the window again, but there was nothing, only his own reflection in the glass, pale and frightened. Then, just beyond his image, he caught it, the faint outline of something tall, too tall, standing among the trees. It didn't move, didn't sway. It just waited. He grabbed his phone, only to see the screen flicker and die despite being fully charged hours earlier. Panic spiked. He rummaged through his grandfather's journal again, desperate for answers, and found an entry about the Watchers. They were described as figures that imitated human behavior but never quite got it right. Their footsteps too heavy, their whistles too hollow, their stillness too absolute. The entry ended with a chilling line. They knock because they are learning how to be invited in. The whistle came again, so close now it seemed to seep through the cabin walls. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound wasn't muffled. It was inside him, vibrating through his bones. The lantern flickered violently, its flame bending toward the window as though drawn by some unseen current. Then the silence returned, deep and suffocating. For a moment, Daniel almost believed they had gone, until the sound of the doorknob rattling broke the stillness. Adrenaline surged. Daniel grabbed the lantern in one hand and the heaviest tool he could find, an old crowbar, in the other. He backed toward the narrow staircase leading to the cabin's loft. His grandfather had always said the loft was the safe place, though Daniel never understood why. Tonight, with the knob turning, clicking, and then stopping, he understood it was not about safety, but survival. He climbed quickly, pulling the ladder up behind him, and pressed his back to the wall as the door creaked open below. Daniel's flashlight lingered on the rope as if the thin cord alone explained the noises above. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath audible in the thick stillness of the room. He told himself it was nothing, maybe a squirrel trapped in the attic, maybe just his imagination. Yet his body betrayed him, his palms slick with sweat, his legs unwilling to step closer. That rope swayed slightly, rhythmically, as though disturbed by something that had only just retreated back into the ceiling. Lightning flashed outside the window, lighting the rope for a brief instant like a pendulum against the dark. Then the room plunged into shadow again as he reached up without meaning to, as though pulled forward by a force beyond reason. The rope brushed his fingers, coarse and damp. It was colder than it should have been, as though it had been outside in the storm. He pulled his hand back quickly, his skin prickling. He thought about dragging the dresser beneath it, pulling down the hatch, and shining his light inside. But every instinct screamed against it. His father's voice, long buried in memory, whispered inside his head, "If you ever feel something watching you, don't give it the chance to show its face." Daniel backed away slowly, his light sweeping across the corners of the room, convincing himself there was nothing there. The dresser sat squat and heavy in the corner, dust clinging to its surface. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall beside it, its reflection warped and darkened with age. When his beam passed across it, he froze. For the briefest second, the mirror didn't reflect him. Instead, it showed a tall, unmoving silhouette standing beneath the hatch rope, though the space was empty when he turned his head to look. The beam faltered, his hand trembling, and when he returned the light to the mirror, it showed only him again, pale-faced and wide-eyed. That a thud above him made his knees nearly buckle. It wasn't the dragging shuffle this time. It was a deliberate stomp, heavy enough to rattle dust down from the beams overhead. Then another, closer to the hatch. Daniel stumbled back into the hall, slamming the door shut as though that thin piece of wood could keep whatever was up there contained. His breath came in shallow bursts, heart hammering so loudly it nearly drowned the rain outside. But through the door, through the thick silence of the cabin, he thought he heard it. A faint scratching along the attic floorboards, tracing the ceiling above him wherever he moved. He didn't run. Running would have meant acknowledging the truth, that something shared the cabin with him, something patient, something waiting. Instead, Daniel crept back down the stairs, every step deliberate, as if sudden movement might draw it closer. When he reached the living room again, the fire had nearly died, its last embers glowing faintly in the hearth. The shadows pressed in heavier now, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. He sank into the armchair, flashlight clenched tight, and tried to convince himself it would pass. But just as he closed his eyes, thunder cracked overhead, followed by a soft knock, not at the door this time, but at the living room window behind him. The knock was so faint Daniel thought he had imagined it. A soft tap-tap-tap against the window pane behind him, barely audible over the storm. His flashlight jerked in his hand as he spun around, casting its beam across the living room wall and catching the window in its glow. Rain streaked the glass in glistening rivulets, reflecting the light in fractured patterns. For a moment, there was nothing there, just the storm pressing against the cabin. Then the knock came again, clearer this time. Not a branch, not the wind. A deliberate, patient rhythm, as though someone wanted him to know they were still waiting. Daniel's chest tightened, every nerve straining as he forced himself to step closer. The beam from his flashlight struck the window directly, illuminating the porch outside. It was empty. No figure, no movement. But then he noticed something he hadn't before: handprints. Dozens of them smeared across the glass, faint and streaked by the rain. Some were small, like those of a child, others long and skeletal. They hadn't been there earlier. He pressed closer to confirm, the hairs on his arms standing on end, when his own reflection wavered. For a split second, another face stared back at him through the rain-soaked glass. Pale, featureless, and far too close. He staggered backward, tripping over the edge of the rug and landing hard on the floor. The flashlight rolled away, spinning its beam wildly across the ceiling and walls, making shadows leap like frantic shapes. Daniel crawled after it, his breath ragged, his pulse thundering in his ears. When he grasped it again, the beam cut across the window. This time, only his reflection remained. No faces, no prints, nothing but the storm. The glass looked clean, as though the handprints had never been there at all. His thoughts blurred, fighting to make sense of the shifting reality around him. Was exhaustion warping his senses, or had the cabin itself been waiting for him to arrive? He pulled the curtains closed with trembling hands, sealing out the storm, sealing out the thing, whatever it had been, that stared back. The fire had nearly gone cold, the cabin dark except for the narrow circle of his light. He thought about leaving, braving the storm, but the thought of opening the door filled him with a dread deeper than the attic or the window. What if the knocks had been lures, meant to draw him outside where the real danger waited? No, he had to wait until daylight. If he could make it until morning, maybe all of this would unravel into something ordinary, something explainable. Gathering what little courage he had left, Daniel moved toward the downstairs bedroom. His bag still lay on the bed, untouched. He slid inside, closing the door behind him, though the thin wood offered no comfort. The flashlight rested on the nightstand, its beam angled toward the ceiling, leaving the room in half-light. He sat on the mattress, trying to calm his breathing. And that was when he heard it again, the sound that had started it all. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. But this time, they didn't come from the door, or the window, or even the attic. They came from the other side of the bedroom wall, inches from where he sat. The knocks came slow, measured, and impossibly close. 3 hollow thuds against the bedroom wall, directly behind Daniel's head. He bolted upright, staring at the wood as though it might split open. His breath hitched, chest rising and falling in panicked bursts, yet the silence that followed was worse. He pressed his palm to the wall, the grain rough beneath his fingertips. Cold radiated through the wood, colder than the storm-chilled air outside, as if the wall itself separated him from something not of this world. His hand lingered there for just a moment before he pulled away, afraid of what might knock back. The flashlight beam jittered as he aimed it along the wall, tracing the seams where the boards met. Nothing moved, no cracks revealed themselves, but he couldn't shake the sense that something, was pressed close on the other side. He tried to listen past the storm, straining for even the faintest hint of noise, when it came again. Not a knock this time, but a scrape. Long, slow, nails dragging down the inside of the wall. His stomach twisted. There was no space behind this room, just the outer edge of the cabin. Unless there was a crawl space. Unless the attic wasn't the only hidden place in the house, he forced himself off the bed and into the hall, determined to map the walls of the cabin, to prove to himself there was no void for something to occupy. But when he rounded the corner, his blood ran cold. On the other side of that very wall, where there should have been nothing but rain-battered siding, was another door. A narrow, weathered door he swore hadn't been there when he'd first explored the cabin. Its frame leaned slightly inward, as though time itself had pressed down upon it. A rusted padlock hung broken from its latch, the door now standing just barely ajar. Daniel's light caught the narrow gap, and within it, only darkness breathed. He crouched slightly, listening, and nearly recoiled when the sound came again. That same dragging shuffle he had first heard upstairs. Not above, not outside, but inside the hidden space behind the door. His throat tightened. Logic screamed at him to shut the bedroom, to bar the door, to wait for daylight. But some awful, gnawing part of him, the part that wanted answers, that needed to know, forced his feet forward. The closer he came, the colder the air grew, until his breath plumed faintly before him. He placed a shaking hand on the wood and pushed. The door creaked open. The smell hit him first: damp rot, mildew, and something sour, metallic, like old blood. His flashlight beam trembled into the narrow crawl space beyond, illuminating wooden beams and crumbling stone. And then he saw it: handprints. Not just one or two, but dozens, blackened and greasy, smeared along the inside of the walls as though someone had clawed their way out. Some were fresh, still wet and glistening. At the far end of the crawl space, in the thin circle of his light, a figure crouched low, its limbs long and angular. Its head turned slowly toward him, though no features marked its face. The beam of Daniel's flashlight locked on the faceless figure, and for a moment, he couldn't move. His body refused to obey him, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what he was seeing. It crouched low, limbs bent at grotesque angles, its skin slick and pale like something birthed in the dark. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Yet he felt watched, seen, consumed. Its head cocked to the side in an unnatural twitch, the way an animal studies unfamiliar prey. The air grew colder still, every breath Daniel exhaled condensing before him. He realized he was shaking so hard the light trembled like a dying star in the crawl space. Then, it moved. Not forward, but sideways, dragging its elongated arms against the walls, smearing over the wet handprints already there. The sound was unbearable, skin sliding against wood, bone scraping stone. Daniel stumbled backward, shoulders slamming against the hallway wall. His instincts screamed at him to flee, to run into the storm, but some primal fear told him that turning his back on it would be worse. The figure's limbs unfolded as it began to rise, its full height monstrous, barely fitting within the narrow confines of the space. Still faceless, yet its presence was louder than words, as though the silence itself bent to make room for it. Daniel's breath caught when the figure's head tilted toward him, as if scenting him through the dark. He raised the flashlight higher, its beam glaring into that featureless face, desperate to burn it away. For the briefest moment, it recoiled, twitching its head back like a startled insect. Hope flared. Maybe the light hurt it. Maybe he had some defense. But then, slowly, it leaned forward again, unaffected, its blank visage filling the beam. The light dimmed, flickering, as though the thing drained it simply by being. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the walls, clawing toward Daniel even though nothing touched him. With a surge of adrenaline, Daniel slammed the door shut. The frame shuddered, hinges rattling, dust falling from the ceiling. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, and he dared to think it might hold. But then came the pounding. First soft, an echo of the knocks that had followed him since nightfall. Then harder, louder. Each blow against the wood reverberated through the hallway, shaking through his bones. The broken padlock clattered to the floor as the door began to bow inward. He stumbled back, fumbling for something, anything, to block it, but the narrow hall was barren. The pounding grew faster, more frenzied. The faceless thing pushing to be free, Daniel fled. He bolted down the stairs two at a time, his legs barely keeping pace with his panic. The cabin groaned around him, each strike from upstairs reverberating through its frame. He staggered into the living room, nearly collapsing in front of the dead fireplace. His flashlight flickered, casting the room in disjointed bursts of light and dark. And then, in one of those bursts, he saw it. Not upstairs, not behind the door, but at the foot of the staircase. It stood there, impossibly fast, its faceless head tilted, its elongated arms dangling at its sides, fingertips nearly brushing the floor. The thing had followed him. Daniel's legs nearly gave out when he saw it at the bottom of the stairs. The faceless thing stood in silence, its unnaturally long arms hanging at its sides, fingertips grazing the floorboards. Water dripped from its limbs, pooling beneath it as though it had carried the storm inside. Its blank head tilted slightly, twitching, as if trying to make sense of him. Daniel lifted the flashlight instinctively, aiming the beam directly at it. For a heartbeat, he thought it recoiled, but then the light dimmed again, the shadows stretching closer, smothering the room in oppressive darkness. It wasn't afraid of him. It was playing with him. The fire was dead, the cabin reduced to a battlefield of light and dark. Daniel's chest heaved, his breathing too loud, too ragged. He forced himself still, lowering his breaths, remembering how hunters described the silence before the kill. If he ran now, it would follow. If he screamed, it would pounce. The creature's head twitched again, listening. The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the window panes, yet Daniel swore the thing was attuned only to him. His pulse thundered in his ears, and for one terrifying moment, he wondered if it could hear that too. The silence stretched. Seconds felt like hours. The figure remained by the staircase, unmoving, but its presence filled the room like a shadow pressing down on his chest. Then, slowly, it raised one hand. The fingers bent back too far, bending until the knuckles cracked like snapping twigs. It dragged those fingers across the wall, leaving long, wet streaks on the wood. The sound was unbearable, like nails on stone, multiplied. Daniel gritted his teeth, every nerve screaming at him to run, but he stood rooted, flashlight quivering in his grip. The thing seemed to savor the torment, stretching the moment out, waiting for him to break. Then the flashlight flickered, and for the briefest instant of darkness, it was gone. Daniel's breath caught. He whipped the beam across the room, desperate, and found nothing by the stairs. His gut twisted. He spun toward the window, toward the door, toward the hall, but the cabin was empty. Too empty. The silence was wrong again, heavier than before. Then he heard it, faint but close. Breathing. Right behind him. He didn't think. He reacted. Daniel threw himself to the side, crashing into the armchair as the flashlight beam swept across the space where he had just been. The figure loomed inches away, faceless head turned toward him, arms dangling low enough to drag across the rug. It hadn't moved like a man. It had appeared, slipping through the dark like water through cracks. Daniel scrambled to his feet, grabbed the fire iron from beside the hearth, and brandished it uselessly in one hand, flashlight in the other. The figure tilted its head, curious, as if amused by the gesture. The standoff had ended. Now, the hunt would begin. The fire iron felt pitiful in Daniel's trembling hands, but he held it like a shield, knuckles white. The faceless thing tilted its head, twitching in small, insect-like jerks as if studying his resistance. Then it moved, not in a sprint, but in a slow, deliberate step forward, the floorboards groaning beneath its weight. Daniel backed away until his shoulders hit the wall. His mind screamed at him to fight, but his body had already chosen flight. With a burst of adrenaline, he lunged toward the front door, snatching the knob and yanking it open just as the thing's long arms swung out toward him. The storm swallowed him instantly. Rain lashed his face, the wind driving needles of cold into his skin. Behind him, the door slammed against the wall with a crack of splintering wood as the creature pushed through. Daniel stumbled down the porch steps, his boots slipping on the slick boards. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the forest for a fleeting second. In that flash, he saw them. Footprints, dozens of them, leading away from the cabin in all directions. Some small, some impossibly large, all pressed fresh into the mud, though no one had been here. His stomach turned. Had it been walking here long before he arrived? He bolted into the trees, branches whipping his arms and face. The forest floor squelched beneath him, mud clinging to his boots, threatening to pull him down. The flashlight beam jittered wildly, slicing through rain and darkness. Behind him, there was no sound of pursuit, only the storm. That silence was worse than footsteps. It meant it was watching, waiting. He ducked beneath low branches, lungs burning, every muscle screaming at him to keep going. When he dared a glance over his shoulder, the cabin had vanished into the storm, swallowed by the trees. He was alone, or so he thought. The light caught movement. Just ahead, between two pines, something shifted, a pale arm, long and angular, pulling back into the shadows. Daniel stumbled to a stop, nearly dropping the flashlight. His chest heaved as he scanned the trees, beams swinging frantically from side to side. Nothing, just the hiss of rain, the groan of bending branches. He forced himself forward, deeper into the forest, following no path, no sense of direction. The light flickered once, twice, then steadied. He exhaled, relief trembling in his throat, until the beam landed on a figure standing motionless among the trees that it stood there, faceless head tilted, arms limp at its sides. Daniel froze, paralyzed, his breath caught. He blinked, wiped rain from his eyes, and the figure was gone. His stomach knotted, terror climbing up his spine. He whipped the light back and forth, but the forest was empty. Then the sound came again, not behind him this time, not in the trees, but above. A dragging scrape along wet bark, followed by a heavy thud on the ground just a few feet away. The faceless thing was no longer toying with him from a distance. It had joined the hunt. Daniel crashed through the undergrowth until his legs buckled beneath him. Mud splattered his clothes, rain stung his eyes, and his chest burned with each ragged breath. He couldn't keep running forever. The forest felt endless, its trees like prison bars stretching in every direction. When lightning split the sky again, he caught sight of something through the downpour, a shape. At first, his heart stopped, thinking it was the faceless figure waiting in silence. But as the next flash revealed it more clearly, he saw it was a cabin, smaller than the one he had fled, leaning crooked against the storm, its roof sagging with rot. Sheltered, that he stumbled toward it, slipping in the mud, dragging himself up the warped steps. The door was unlocked, its frame swollen with rain. He shoved it open and slipped inside, slamming it shut against the storm. For a moment, relief washed over him. The air was damp and musty, but it was dry. It was walls. It was space between him and the thing outside. He sagged against the door, every muscle quivering from exhaustion. His flashlight beam swept across the interior. A single room, barren but for a toppled chair and a broken table. Dust and cobwebs draped every corner. As though no one had lived here in decades, he collapsed against the wall, letting the flashlight fall to his lap. His breath came in short, uneven bursts, but gradually it slowed. The storm outside pounded against the roof, but in here, the sound was muffled, almost bearable. For the first time since the night began, Daniel felt a fragile thread of safety. Maybe he could wait it out here. Maybe the creature would lose interest when it couldn't find him. He let his head fall back against the wall, eyes closing for just a moment, body begging for rest. The knock came softly. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, on the wall just inches from his head. His eyes flew open, his blood turning to ice. The sound had followed him here, as steady and certain as a heartbeat. His hand fumbled for the flashlight, lifting it with trembling fingers. The beam swept across the empty room, catching only dust and broken furniture. Nothing moved. And yet, as his light reached the far wall, his breath stopped. There, in the damp wood, were handprints. Black, smeared, layered over each other in chaotic clusters, just like the crawl space. Some were small, others impossibly long, that he staggered to his feet, backing toward the door when the sound came again. Not a knock this time, but breathing. Slow, measured, in sync with his own, as though the room itself inhaled when he did. The flashlight wavered, and in its trembling glow he realized the truth. The handprints weren't just stains. They were fresh, wet. Some glistened as droplets ran down the wall. His beam caught movement in the farthest corner of the room. A pale arm, slowly unfurling from the shadows, followed by another. The faceless thing had never lost him. It had led him here. Daniel's back pressed hard against the cabin door as the pale arms uncoiled from the shadows. The faceless thing emerged slowly, unfolding its elongated frame until it loomed taller than the rotting ceiling. Water dripped from its skin, pattering onto the dirt floor in steady beats, as though counting down the moments left to him. His flashlight shook violently in his grip, the beam skating across its featureless head, its twitching limbs. The air thickened, colder, until each breath burned his lungs. He realized with dawning horror that it hadn't chased him here at all. It had herded him, step by step, exactly where it wanted him. The creature took a step forward, its weight groaning through the floorboards. Daniel raised the fire iron he had carried all this way, brandishing it like a weapon, though the futility of it rang clear even to him. Still, he screamed, a raw, desperate sound that seemed swallowed by the thing's silence. The faceless head tilted, jerking unnaturally to one side, as though amused by the display. It didn't rush him. It didn't need to. Instead, it lifted one arm and dragged its long fingers slowly across the wall, leaving a fresh trail of wet, glistening handprints beside the others. The sound was unbearable, like nails raking across bone. Lightning split the sky, flooding the cabin with white light for a heartbeat. In that flash, Daniel saw more than he wanted to. The handprints on the wall didn't just cover the wood. They layered over each other into shapes, into outlines of faces. Dozens of faces, all pressed into the grain, screaming mouths and hollow eyes burned into the stains. When the darkness returned, he knew what it meant. He was not the first. This thing had done this before, many times, and each time, it had left behind its mark. A warning, or perhaps a record that Daniel's body moved before his mind caught up. He hurled the fire iron into the creature's chest, a futile gesture but enough to stagger it back a step. Seizing the moment, he wrenched the door open and hurled himself into the storm. Rain blinded him, mud clawed at his boots, and branches tore at his clothes as he ran. But he didn't stop. Not when he tripped, not when his knees bled, not when the forest seemed to close in. Behind him, there was no pursuit, no footsteps, only silence broken by the storm. When at last he collapsed onto the gravel road, gasping, he realized the cabin was gone, vanished into the trees as though it had never existed. Days later, when hikers found him wandering the road, delirious and rain-soaked, Daniel told them nothing. Who would believe him? Yet even after returning home, he could not escape it. At night, when the city around him lay quiet, he would hear it again. 3 slow knocks, sometimes at his apartment door, sometimes against the bedroom wall. Always deliberate, always patient. He knew, with a certainty that hollowed him out, that the faceless thing had not been left behind in the woods. It had followed him, and it was only a matter of time before the last knock came from inside.